with the Lancet Commission on Global Surgery, developed a teaching case study on the adoption of a national surgical plan in Zambia. So our objective with the case is to really have it be a comprehensive view of all the processes involved in that adoption of a national surgical plan, not focusing on the implementation, but just the strategic meaning of putting together the plan and what it looks like. And with that, kind of exploring the challenges and best practices so that it can be used by other individuals. I'll give that in a second. So our audience for this and expected use is with other national level policymakers, potentially from other countries who are looking at adopting a national surgical plan of their own, because Zambia is really the first country to do this. And so they are the pioneers of this effort. And so that's really what this case is for, is exploring those challenges, really getting a narrative view of what the process looked like, how it can be adopted. And so in doing so, it kind of will help those other governments or policymakers see the value of surgery, in addition with the overall Lancet Commission, but really seeing a more tangible view of what that process would look like, how they would start that sort of initiative. And so this is just a brief outline of our case study. We're about to break it down a little bit. So start with an introduction, and in this is really going to be a narrative format as much as possible, with our main protagonist being Dr. Emmanuel Mukasa. Hopefully, we'll get to the challenges later. But so Dr. Emmanuel is a doctor in Zambia. He's high up working with the government. He's also been very involved in surgery on a global level. And so our case kind of starts off at this Bellagio implementation meeting. So this is a meeting put on by the Lancet Commission. And it's a unique venue because the Lancet Commissions, I think they have one a year, one every other year. Those commissions are big research projects, and they put out this paper through the Lancet Medical Journal. It's a prestigious medical journal in England, I think. Yeah. But their role in the commission is just to put out the paper, and they've never before really gone into any sort of implementation. So that's where this meeting is kind of unique. And so during the meeting, Dr. Emmanuel texts his government, and that's actually how they describe it, is he texts his government, and he says that my government volunteered, I've just communicated with my government, and they volunteered to be the first country to implement a national surgical plan. So we kind of start off with that narrative, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Zambian resolution with the World Health Assembly. So this was kind of showing Zambia's commitment to surgery before the Lancet Commission was published at all. Zambia was the key sponsor of this resolution to strengthen emergency surgical and anesthesia care. And this serves as more of a commitment on a global scale on a government level to really develop surgical capacity.
So returning a little bit to what, I don't actually know how to word this, Matt was talking about at the Lancet Commission. So just a little background, the Lancet is a United Kingdom medical journal, fairly prominent, and since 2002, I believe, they have been releasing these commissions and series that they're sponsoring, and their theory of change with those is that all of the commissions focus on a specific topic in global health, and by bringing together worldwide experts on these topics, they're hoping to publish, each commission will publish a landmark report document, and from that, it provides all of the background and the steps and course of action for that topic, and then going from there, they look to continue advocacy and implementation of whatever that topic is. So the commission we are focusing on is the Lancet Commission on Global Surgery. It was introduced in December of 2013 and consisted of chairs, including Dr. John Mira, 22 commissioners, and then throughout the course of 2014, these commissioners, alongside other advisors and stakeholders that are on the world, and formed working groups and started to really delve into this topic of global surgery, which they believe is a critical component to global health. And so in 2014, they published a landmark report called Global Surgery 2030. And within that, it's a 60-plus page document that delineates like the assessment of the conditions of global surgery, recommendations, and a framework of action moving forward for governments, other NGO organizations, and then like clinical providers to provide improvement in surgical care. And so the really unique thing about this commission, as Matt was talking about, is usually when the commissions are working, they publish a document, and then that's sort of the end of it. They get the information out there, and then they say, world, go do this. And in this case, the Lancet has kind of continued working with global surgery after the publication of its document. And so it's really working with teaching cases such as these, and working with national governments to start to develop these surgical plans. And so into that comes Zambia. And so I just want to make a note as we move forward, we're going to be talking about the Lancet team, but some of those key players are also part of Harvard's program in global surgery and social change. And the connection there is that one of the chairs of the Lancet Commission is Dr. Don Mira, who is at Harvard. And so he sort of has headed up both of these entities, and they've come together. So our collaborative partner in this teaching this is a man called Swag, who works with PGSSC, and he is so PGSSC is basically the team on the ground in Zambia that's doing this work.
Dr. Swag.
Dr. Swag.
Well, he has a last name, that's just his first name.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we're going to skip a couple of these kind of basic facts that you can read off the slide. But I think what you need to know about Zambia is that it achieved independence in 1965 or 64 from the UK. And that it's a country that pretty much relies solely on its export of copper, and prices of copper have been going down recently, so they're in kind of a fiscal deficit, fiscal problem at the moment, which is also kind of translated into the health budget, which decreased by 8% last year. So it's a difficult kind of economic outlook in terms of the implementation of this. I think what you want to kind of direct your attention to is the country-specific challenges that we have identified. So first off, there's a concentration of pretty much everything that is going on in the country along the copper belt, which pretty much runs straight through the middle of the country. Everything else is kind of rural, and there is just limited access in terms of having medical services and infrastructure, and also electricity. So that's really a problem. So the second one that we have identified is continued funding of health services, which I think is a basic one. In the interviews that we've done with key actors, this has really been the kind of point that they've been hitting on in terms of the challenges, in terms of the implementation. The third one is human capital. So only about 3% of the adolescent population has attained post-secondary education. The fourth one is to find a way for the Lancet Commission, the Ministry of Health, to kind of include the surgical plan as a vital part of Zambia's development going forward. So also having infrastructure, having education, having supply of electricity and supply of equipment in coordination with the implementation of the surgical plan. And the fifth one that we have identified is affordability and access to healthcare. So the Lancet has developed something they call kind of indicators of how price sensitive the Zambian population is, or how price sensitive the population of a given country is to different surgical procedures. And what they found is that more than 50% of all surgical procedures, and this is kind of like the basic, the most basic surgical procedure you can think of, up to kind of like a C-section or something like that. More than 50% of all those constitute a catastrophic expenditure for a Zambian resident or for a Zambian citizen, which is obviously a huge problem in terms of where's the funding going to come from, and how are they going to ensure access to everyone.
And then, so to quickly go through this, we have a bunch more, kind of more in-depth outline of healthcare, but for now, the kind of major issues here are this idea of the National Health Policy in 1979, which declared that healthcare for all was sort of a right. And now the rhetoric around this idea of surgery is kind of expanding beyond primary care, using actually this law to say, okay, well, healthcare for all does not just include primary care, and that's kind of continuously comes up in all the interviews we've conducted. And then beyond that, there's this idea, Sonny kind of mentioned, of the copper belt, and a lot of the shortage of healthcare workers kind of centers around that. And then the result, and what's become sort of a concern for this idea of surgery, is that rurally there's not a lot of healthcare providers. And then finally, just to kind of summarize Zambia's health system, it's not great, but it's improving, and that's kind of the major point I want to drive home here. It's just that with the development of the MDGs, there have been significant decreases in like the under 5 mortality rates and the infant mortality rates, but at the same time, there still is a long way to come in terms of primary care.
So then turning back to the narrative timeline, just a brief overview of what happened in actually developing this national surgical plan. So once the Dr. Makasa had expressed his interest in Zambia being this player, there was a launch of the published document in April 2015, and the resolution that Matt was talking about was set forth the following May. And then from there, over the summer, the Lancet and PGSSC team started to do an extensive literature review on the state of surgery in Zambia. And in August of 2015, the team arrived on the ground and started meeting with players in the Ministry of Health, getting permission to talk with the clinical providers, and then from there it kind of snowballed. So for that first meeting, it was a lot of getting to know people, starting to express interest. And then a really important aspect of this narrative after that first meeting was in the fall of 2015, there had to be a lot of letters written to sort of formalize this process that was going to be undertaken. And in there, we've run into a lot of cultural dynamic in the appropriate way to write a letter and to deliver it. And so we'll kind of go into that in our teaching case, but just that was an aspect in the fall. Eventually, they were able to make a remote meeting, get the approval for this plan to get going, and Dr. Lashimpi became he's a provider within the Ministry of Health. He's rather high up, I think he's third from the top, and he was the point person with which the Lancet team was collaborating. So then last winter, in 2016, students back in the United States at Harvard and Boston College, et cetera, were organizing all of that literature that the Lancet had acquired to sort of synthesize where the state of surgery was at. The team went back to Zambia and collaborated with all sorts of different levels of the players involved at the ministry, NGOs, the government, clinical providers. And so in the narrative, we'll sort of go into the details of how intense and somewhat chaotic at times that process was, of just meeting with as many people as possible to get as many stories as possible to really understand what the needs were for surgical improvement in the country. And then once those interviews had been conducted and an assessment of who was involved and who wanted to be involved was determined, a committee was formed. And so the way it worked were there were about 60 people on this committee, and it was broken down into 3 subcommittees. The Zambian government expressed an interest in combining these surgical domains into 3 different categories listed here. And then the people on this committee were basically anyone who was involved in creating that system of care. And so that ranged from doctors and surgeons to Ministry of Health workers to nurses to other experts within surgery. And so the focus really there was to get in anyone who would have firsthand experience of this problem and get them into these rooms discussing this issue and writing this plan. It was a fairly condensed timeline in order to get the plan corresponding with the 5-year strategic plan of healthcare in Zambia, which finished up right about now, actually. And so the whole idea was to get this national surgical plan signed into action prior to this overall strategic plan. So there was a writing workshop that the team did following the committee, and then in early May 2016, a National Surgical Forum announced the National Surgical Plan.
Okay, so we can kind of just breeze through this, but basically,
sorry, we're talking really fast.
One of the components that we're going to try and add in is this idea of challenges and successes, because when they distribute it to other governments, it basically is a way for them to tell the other government what they really liked about working with Zambia and not explicitly say, please do this. And at the same time, also say, okay, this is what we would have changed. So I won't go through those, but. And then at the same time, kind of moving forward, one of the main issues is funding now. They really want to set the precedent of them being the first country to do it, and part of that is getting funding and making it actually happen. So that's a main concern. And then moving forward from here, part of that is costing it out and kind of finalizing the actual plan. So.
Okay, so we've obtained interviews with different key stakeholders from the Harvard team. We also have meetings with SWAG and the Harvard team as well. It's difficult to get hold of everyone that we need to get hold of, and we're basically writing the case. The challenge is two things. So the Ministry of Health are not actually able to share the plan with us, and it's really difficult to get hold of the people we need to talk to.
It's especially hard with the people we want to get the narrative from, the key players, and Dr. Emanuel and Dr. Lashimpi. Dr. Emanuel won't be available until mid-December at the very earliest, and Dr. Lashimpi is impossible to contact.
Yes, and these two are the two kind of concerns, or the two challenges that we're working on right now in terms of framing the story.
So I had them go last, so everybody else feels good about how well yours is all put together. Now, you guys, I think are going to be in just fine shape. I think we've run out of time. Maybe I can stay with you and give just a little bit of feedback. And but I think everybody's set. So the State Department folks, if you want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to respond to any kind of stuff. Cindy, do you have a timing?